It is a great honor for me to be here with you today. And it's actually rather overwhelming when I have met a number of you already who have said that uh, the book that I wrote has had an impact on your ministry, on your parish. And that, bless you. That for me is very overwhelming. It's just amazing to see how God is at work. And I want to begin today by saying thank you to each of you for making the effort to be here today. I want to say thank you to each of you for having some passion down here in your guts, for not giving in to simply being functionaries. Thank you for even beginning to dream that it can be different from what it is, that it can be different. So I want to thank you for the effort, the energy, the expense that investing in these days has been for you. I want to thank you for making that investment. I also want to thank you as a nation. You know, I'm originally from Scotland. I grew up in Scotland and went to Canada when I was 13 years old. And for many centuries, and still to this day, Scottish priests, many of them are sent to Spain to study for the priesthood. It used to be in Valladolid, and now is in Salamanca. And I was sharing with another priest, the priest from Valladolid. I was there 2 years ago, and the seminary there now used to be the Scots College. And one of the first bishops of Nova Scotia, my province in Canada, he was ordained a priest in Valladolid and came to Nova Scotia to be a bishop. And so there is a historical, spiritual connection between your spiritual ancestors and my spiritual ancestors. So I want to thank you for that as well. I want to just take a moment to go over what we're going to cover over these next 2 days. 4 sessions. This session I'm going to look at the magisterial teaching from the Second Vatican Council through to Pope Francis. This is going to be the most boring talk. Okay? Are you good with that? It's going to get much more exciting afterwards. But later this afternoon, I'm going to look at some of the obstacles that exist in our church that prevent us from realizing the vision taught in the documents of our church about renewal. Then tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit about pastoral models for becoming this kind of parish. And I'm going to speak a lot about my experience at St. Benedict Parish. And then tomorrow afternoon, the second talk, we're going to talk about the role of leadership. How, especially the priest, is called to be priest, prophet, king. That leadership dimension of the priestly vocation and how that can be lived out to serve this model of church. How does that sound? Sound good? Okay. But unfortunately, this one is very boring. Okay? So I hope you all had some coffee. I want to begin also by saying that I don't come here today claiming to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I think we're asking the right questions. The people in my parish, the people I work with, I think we're asking the right questions. And we're proposing some answers, but I can't tell you they're the best answers. All I know is that the answers we're currently proposing are better than the ones we used to propose. Okay? That's all I know. I have learned a great deal from other people over the years. I've been a priest this year for 20 years. I've learned from many wonderful Catholic leaders, non-Catholic leaders. I've read a lot of books, and I've made a lot of mistakes. A lot of mistakes. And I've learned from those. So hopefully today and tomorrow we can enter into this discussion and learn more from one another. I hope to speak today until 4:20, 4:25, and then have time for questions and answers. Okay? All right. I want to show you a photograph of my parish. You ready? There you go. It's a small parish. I show you this because oftentimes when we say, I want to show you a picture of my parish, we expect to see a photograph of a building. This is the only building that the New Testament knows about, is the building made of living stones, the building of people. And this is a photograph of one of our mid-sized groups in our parish. We call them Connect groups. And I'm going to say a lot more about this tomorrow. But currently we have 12 of these groups that meet once every 2 weeks in homes of parishioners, 20 to 35 people. And they are lay-led. They meet for, they share a meal together. They have a time of prayer together. One person will give a talk. They break into small groups to discuss and then to pray with one another. And the best thing about this is that it's not what happens at the meeting that's important. It's what happens during the next 2 weeks. That's what's important. Because people know each other, they love each other, they support each other, they care for each other, so that my parish is slowly becoming a community of communities. In my parish, we have an average weekend attendance of about 1,500 people with 4 masses, 1,500 people with 4 masses. So we have 12 of these groups so far. It's our dream, it's our vision that every parishioner will eventually join one of these groups and belong to one of these groups. My church does have a physical building. This is the physical building, and it exists in the Archdiocese of Halifax, Yarmouth. And just in case anyone is not sure where that is right there. You got it? Okay, so that's where Halifax is. And if you leave Halifax Harbor on a ship and you sail directly east, guess where you'll land? Northern Spain, Galicia, right there. You'll hit the coast. So the next time when I'm home, I'm going to look out my window and I'm going to wave to Spain. I like Twitter. If there's anyone on Twitter, this is my Twitter handle. And I encourage you to use the hashtag Divine Renovation. That's the English title of the book. And if you use this hashtag, there are people around the world who have tweeted at other times who will be able to see this. So if you wish. So we're going to talk a little bit about Vatican II to Pope Francis. And I want to mention 3 things, 3 basic points that are really everything you need to know. Okay? So the first thing is what I would call a hermeneutic of continuity. There are many interpretations of the council, and I'm sure I heard about Father's talk earlier today about the continuity between the Council of Trent and the Second Vatican Council. But there are a lot of voices in our church today who want to approach the blossoming of the church as through our hermeneutic of discontinuity. That it is not a continuous thing. And I believe that when we look at the core teachings of the Second Vatican Council and go through what the different popes have said over the years around evangelization, there is an incredible continuity. The second point is as we go from the Second Vatican Council through to Pope Francis, through John Paul and Pope Benedict, we see, even from Pope Paul VI, a narrowing of the definition of evangelization. Now, I'm going to go into these more in depth, but we see a more narrow definition of evangelization and how it is distinct from catechesis. And And thirdly, the development of the use of personalist language such as personal encounter, to know Jesus personally, to have a personal relationship with Jesus. This is language that 50 years ago was not used in our tradition at all. In many cases, we could say, has come to us from the non-Catholic world. But even in the non-Catholic world, this language was not used 60, 70 years ago either. So this is a distinct vocabulary that has emerged in the documents of our church. So let's go back and look at the Second Vatican Council. And I'm going to make a proposal that is a little audacious. And that is to say that if we look from 10,000 feet, in a sense, down at the 16 documents of the Second Vatican Council, and we asked ourselves, what could you boil it down to? What are the essential insights of the council? After 50 years, after all of the debates and arguments around the reform of the liturgy and liturgical language and governance of the church and all the stuff around, who has the power and collegiality and blah, 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 what does it boil down to? And I think that only today, 50 years later, we're finally able to get at the heart of the matter. Because all of these other things are distractions. And the heart of the matter, I believe, is this, that throughout the 16 documents, we see again and again and again a call to the universal call to holiness and the universal call to evangelization or mission. Holiness and mission. Nothing new. But the newness is the universal call to holiness and the universal call to mission or evangelization. Because the call to holiness in mission is not rooted in ordination or in religious profession. It is rooted in baptism. Baptism, the call to holiness. And also the call to mission. When we speak about the responsibility for the mission of Jesus Christ, it is rooted in baptism. And so when we speak of the laity and their involvement, it is not simply a matter of collaboration. It is a matter of co-responsibility. The baptized are as responsible for the mission of Jesus Christ as the ordained, because it's rooted in baptism. The universal call to holiness, the universal call to evangelization. This is recovering some of the core principles of our church from the earliest times, perhaps from an apostolic age. And yet these two insights, I believe, 50 years later, are still not properly understood or accepted by the vast majority of Catholics. Now, speaking of the continuity, 10 years, bless you, 10 years after the close of the Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul VI released what still is today the most wonderful document on evangelization that's ever been written, Evangelii Nunciandi by Pope Paul VI. It was a post-synodal apostolic exhortation. It was written after a synod of bishops on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. Now, you would think that on the 10th anniversary of anything, you would focus on the most important insight of that event, right? What did they choose to focus on? Evangelization. Now, Pope Paul VI, in this document, he begins with a broad definition of evangelization. And this brings me to the second principle, that you see a broad definition becoming more narrow and narrow as the years go on. But let's look at this quote. And again, forgive me for only having this in English. The second part of my presentation has some Spanish up there. Thus, it has been possible to define evangelization in terms of proclaiming Christ to those who do not know him. Proclamation of Jesus to those who do not know him. Not simply to those who do not know about him, but to those who do not know him. And that means that evangelization is for people on the outside of the church and for people on the inside of the church. I know in my own life, I knew about Jesus for many years of my life before I came to know him personally. And we all know there are many people like this in our churches. But look at what he goes on to say. He includes preaching, catechesis, and the conferring of baptism and the other sacraments. So the broad definition of Paul VI is proclamation, catechesis, and sacraments, liturgy. It's the full thing. It's very, very broad. However, at the same time, the foundation of the development that we see in these documents, the narrowing of the definition of evangelization, is found within Evangelii Nunciandi itself. He says this: the good news proclaimed by the witness of life sooner or later has to be proclaimed by the word of life. And listen to this part. There is no true evangelization if the name, the teaching, the life, the promises, the kingdom, and the mystery of Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, are not proclaimed. This is very important, because while proclamation does not exhaust evangelization, Pope Paul VI is saying that you can't have real evangelization without proclamation. You see, since new evangelization became popular, it became very much a habit in our dioceses, our churches, to call everything evangelization. This is evangelization, and so is this, and so is this, and so is this. But you see, if everything is evangelization, nothing is evangelization. There is no evangelization unless the name, the teaching, the person of Jesus of Nazareth are proclaimed. There are a lot of things then that may be called pre-evangelization. And this is a very, very important task, pre-evangelization. But evangelization is only evangelization if Jesus Christ is proclaimed. If he is not proclaimed, please don't call it evangelization. Please don't call it that. Again, Paul VI, evangelization will always contain, and listen to this language, as the foundation, as the center, and at the same time the summit of its dynamism, a clear proclamation that in Jesus Christ, the Son of God made man, who died and rose from the dead, salvation is offered to all men as a gift of God's grace and mercy. What a beautiful summary of the heart of the gospel that is proclaimed. But again, a clear proclamation. You see, within Paul VI, we have explicitly a statement that says that clear proclamation, the kerygma, is the foundation, it's the center, and it's the summit of evangelization. Let's move to St. John Paul II's call to new evangelization. Now, I talked about continuity. Evangelii Nunciandi, published in 1975 on the 10th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. 4 years later, Karol Wojtyła becomes Pope. 3 years later, and 4 years later, he uses the term new evangelization for the first time in 1979. Do you know what else is also interesting? Karol Wojtyła was on the writing team for Evangelii Nunciandi. He was one of the bishops who helped to write that document. Continuity, yes? So again, 1979, he uses the term for the first time, and in 1983, he defines it for the first time. He says that new evangelization will be new in its ardor, its methods, and its expression. And I just want to take a few minutes to run through some of the things that St. John Paul II said, okay? So this wonderful quote from his document, The Mission of the Redeemer. I sense the moment has come to commit all of the church's energies to a new evangelization and to the missions ad gentes. And listen to this: no believer in Christ, no institution of the church can avoid this supreme duty to proclaim Christ to all the peoples. Again, proclamation. And it is a supreme duty. It is the supreme duty of the church. And no believer, no institution can be untouched by this. He said in 1992, it is necessary to awaken again in believers a full relationship with Christ, mankind's only Savior. Only from a personal relationship with Jesus can an effective evangelization develop? And this is extraordinary in that for the first time, popes are beginning to use language that was not very Catholic. When I first arrived at my parish almost 7 years ago and began to talk about evangelization and having a personal relationship with Jesus, many of my parishioners said, "Father James, that's not very Catholic." And I say, yes, it is. Yes, it is. How you doing? Going well? Okay. Not too boring. Good. Now, this is another quote from 1993. Sometimes even Catholics have lost or never had a chance to experience Christ personally. Again, the personalist language. Not Christ as a mere paradigm or value, but as the living Lord. And here he indicates a great danger to our faith, and that is the reduction of our faith to morality, to being a moral system. Pope Francis is very concerned about the same thing. Christianity is not principally a system of morality. It is a covenant faith that has moral consequences for how we live our lives. But for many of our people, it's just about being nice. It's about learning how to live properly. It's simply about ethics rather than covenant faith. Novo millennio iniunte. This passion will not fail to stir in the church a new sense of mission, which cannot be left to a group of specialists, but must involve the responsibility of all the members of the people of God. This is co-responsibility for the mission of God. Again, the central theme of the Second Vatican Council. Those who have come into genuine contact with Christ cannot keep him for themselves. They must proclaim him. And then we move from St. John Paul to Pope Benedict. And with Pope Benedict, you have a continuation of the emergence of this personalist language, and also the narrowing of the focus of evangelization as proclamation that leads to conversion, and as distinct from catechesis and sacraments. This is a general audience in 2008. Listen to these words. Christianity is not a new philosophy or a new morality. We are only Christians if we have encountered Christ. Only in this personal relationship with Christ, only in this encounter with the risen one, do we truly become Christians. Wow. This is a pope saying that if you do not live out your faith out of this personal encounter with Christ, if you do not know him, then technically you can't truly be a Christian otherwise, because it's not just a system of ethics. To the bishops of the Philippines in 2011, your great task in evangelization is therefore to propose a personal relationship with Christ as key to complete fulfillment. Okay, you get the message, right? It's this language is occurring over and over again. But Pope Benedict's greatest contribution to the new evangelization, of course, was the establishing the office for the re-evangelization of the West in 2010, the Vatican office that he established, and also the call to the Synod of Bishops on October 2012, which would be on the topic, the new evangelization for the transmission of the Christian faith. And I was blessed to be in Rome for a week during the Synod in 2012. I wasn't at the Synod, but I got to meet with a lot of people who were there. It was a very exciting time. And of course, the post-synodal apostolic exhortation that would come out of this synod would be written by Pope Francis. A connection between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. Well, before I go there, let's take a moment to look. Let's see, I seem to be. The Lineamenta, that was the preparatory document for the Synod on New Evangelization, said this: despite the fact that the expression, the new evangelization, is widely known in the church, it has failed to be totally accepted. It's known, but it hasn't been accepted. You know, this is 2010, and John Paul II used the term new evangelization in 1979. That's 31 years. and still the term has not been accepted. Again, another quote. Consequently, the goal of the transmission of the faith is the realization of a personal encounter with Jesus in the Spirit, thereby leading to an experience of his Father as our Father. And finally, people are able to evangelize only when they have been evangelized and allow themselves to be evangelized. That is, renewed spiritually through a personal encounter and live communion with Jesus Christ. So you see this language, and I hope that you can see that there is this continuity down through the years until we come to the person of Pope Francis. And on the very first months of Pope Francis' pontificate, he had that famous interview with America magazine where he was asked this question: who is Jorge Mario Bergoglio? And you'll see now we have some Spanish on the screen, so you're welcome. He said this, I am a sinner whom the Lord has looked upon. Remember his answer, huh? And he went on to talk about his favorite painting is the Call of Levi, which is found in the church of San Luigi de Francesi in Rome, just off of the Piazza Navona. And I love this painting. And you see the hand of Jesus, pointing down, looking very much like the famous hand of God in the Sistine Chapel that gives life to Adam. And here is the hand of Jesus reaching out and giving life to Levi or Matthew. And of course, that great expression, me? And Pope Francis says, this is the magic moment. This is the simultaneous realization of the call and mercy of Jesus Christ and my own unworthiness. This is why he says, I am a sinner whom the Lord has looked upon. It's these two things together. The realization of my unworthiness and the realization that even though I'm unworthy, the Lord loves me, that he calls me, that he chooses me. Another way that we can answer this question, who is Jorge Mario Bergoglio, I believe can be answered by one word, and that is Aparecida. Now, please put up your hands if you've heard of Aparecida before. Okay, no, okay. I remember, I have to wait for the translation to kick in. They're doing a great job. Thank you. I was in Sagrada Familia yesterday, and I saw on one of the stained glass windows Aparecida, because of course it's the shrine, the national shrine of Brazil. And I was there a few years ago. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But Aparecida in the church today is not used to describe a shrine or a city. It's actually in reference to a church document whose real name is Concluding Document of the Fifth General Conference of the Bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean. It's much easier to just simply say Aparecida. It's way too long. But the amazing thing about Aparecida is the connection, the sense of continuity with Pope Francis. It took place between the 13th and 29th of May, 2007. It was opened by Pope Benedict. And Pope Benedict himself approved the focus and the title of the document. The theme, Disciples and Missionaries of Jesus Christ, so that our people may have life in him. You see the continuity. The final document had 3 writers. It called for the complete pastoral conversion of the Latin American church. And the head of the writing team was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would go on to write Evangelii Gaudium on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council, the 40th anniversary of the writing of Evangelii Nunciandi. Again, even the titles of these documents were chosen intentionally to refer to one another. Continuity. And you see here an intensification of the narrowing of the definition of evangelization, making it distinct from catechesis and sacraments. And again, the use of personalist language. And in many ways, I think this is the defining document in many ways, for the man who is now Pope Francis. This is him in Aparecida with the shrine behind him. Okay, how are you? Good. Bueno, bueno. Now I have about 10 more minutes, and then we're going to have some questions and answers. Again, I apologize. This is the most boring talk, so it'll get better soon. Now, there is a term that is used in this document, missionary disciples. You've heard this. You've heard Pope Francis use this term. In the Apparecida document, this term is used 121 times. That is crazy. Isn't that crazy? I mean, for a magisterial document, and I say magisterial document intentionally because this is a document published by the Latin American bishops in union with Pope Benedict. 121 times, missionary disciples. This is, again, a unique term. It's a term that is favored very strongly by Pope Francis, and is a brilliant term, I believe, because it tells us a very important truth, rooted in the Gospel of Matthew, the Great Commission. And remember that in the Great Commission, there are 4 tasks. There's the task to go, to make, to baptize, and to teach. Now, can I take a little poll of you? Who here has actually read my book? It's okay if you haven't. I forgive you. Okay, so most of you know the answer to this, right? You know the answer. That of the 4 tasks, to go, baptize, go, make, baptize, and teach, that the finite verb is to make, right? Make disciples. And all the other verbs are participles. And so grammatically and theologically, of these 4 verbs, the 3 participles and one finite verb, the finite verb is the grammatical center and therefore the theological center of the Great Commission. And that is the task to go and make disciples, mathetusite in Greek. This is the heart of it. But what do we as Catholics struggle with the most? We're very good at going. We're very good at baptizing. Where I come from in Canada, we baptize everything. Just baptize it, baptize it, baptize it. We're very good at teaching. We do all kinds of teaching. What are we not good at? Making disciples. And yet it's the very heart of the Great Commission to make disciples. What is a disciple? What is this thing we are called to make? A disciple, mathetes, is one who learns. It comes from a Greek word, to learn. Well, what is the Spanish word for mathematics? Mathematica. So it's the math. It's the same root. Mathetes, mathematics. So think about that. A disciple is someone who learns. But you see, before you can learn, you have to be desiring to learn. If you don't care, learning becomes impossible. If any of you have ever taught a class of students who don't care about the subject, it's very, very difficult to teach. Something has to happen in here to make you capable of receiving. And that's called evangelization. So to evangelize is to make a disciple. And once someone is a disciple, then their whole life, they are learning and growing. And you see a cycle of evangelization. Let me do this here. See if this works. Oh, there we go. That's magic. So evangelization, the goal of evangelization is to make disciples. And the more disciples we have in our church, the more that the church becomes renewed. This is how it happens, one person at a time. The church is renewed when people are renewed. And the disciples are the ones who are learning. They're the ones who are serving. They're the ones who are giving financially so that the church can grow in her mission, so that the parish can grow in its mission. But disciples eventually have to become apostles, because the disciple is one who learns, but the apostle is the one who is sent. And it's apostles who go out to evangelize so that they can make more disciples, so that the church can be more renewed, so that there can be more apostles and more evangelization and more disciples and more renewal and more apostles, more. It's the cycle of life. But in many of our parishes, it's going the opposite way. There's a cycle of decline. And it's a great tragedy. You see, the disciple must become an apostle. Jesus did not say, go and be disciples. He said, go and make disciples. That's apostles. And of course, the word apostle is simply the Greek word for missionary. That's why Pope Francis says missionary disciples. A missionary disciple is a disciple who's become an apostle. Okay, 5 minutes to go. What was unique about the Aparecida document is that they did exit interviews with the hundreds of thousands, literally millions of Catholics. Of those millions of Catholics who have left the church in Latin America, they interviewed thousands of people. And it was a professor from Peru who did the interviews, and the Latin American bishops used their research. And what they found was in 5.4, those who have left the church to join other religious groups. This is significant. That finally the Latin American bishop said, we have to humble ourselves and learn what has happened. Because in the early decades, when the evangelicals went to Latin America, people said, it'll pass, it's a fad. They have no substance, they have no depth. It won't take hold, it's just, and instead of it not just did it not go away, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what has happened in the last 40 years in Latin America, I believe, has already dwarfed the Reformations of the 16th century. Someone was speaking on Reformations today. What's happened in Latin America in our lifetime is more significant already than what happened in Europe. And it's not finished. It's still picking up momentum. And finally, the leadership of our church have humbled themselves and repented of the attitude and said, maybe there's something we can learn. Maybe we can learn something. And that's what they did. They looked at this research and they found there were several main reasons why people left the Catholic Church. The first was religious experience. People said, in my Catholic experience, I did not experience a personal encounter with Jesus. I did not come into a personal relationship with him, but I did in this non-Catholic church. In spite of the fact that for 30 odd years, the popes have been talking about this as necessary, it's not happened. Community life. In my Catholic experience, it felt like it didn't matter whether I was there or not there. I felt like I was alone in a crowd. I was anonymous. But in this non-Catholic church, I experienced a profound form of community life. Biblical and doctrinal formation that is more than dry knowledge or information. Biblical and doctrinal formation that is transformative. And finally, a missionary commitment of the entire community, not just 2% or 1% or 3% or 10%, but of all the members. We may teach co-responsibility, but we do not live it. We may teach the importance of community, but we often do not live it. We may speak about the importance of religious experience, but many of our people have never had this kind of experience. And what the bishops concluded was that there's a tragedy here. Because people have left the Catholic Church not for doctrinal reasons, but for vivencial reasons. We don't live what we claim to believe. Now, we all know that's the case in all of our lives, at least it is in my life. I am, in many ways, a hypocrite because I profess certain things and I fall short because I'm a sinner. And so it is in the church, but yet we ought to strive to close the gap between these two. I'm going to conclude with this, and I'm going to make one final point and then jump to my final slide. I'm going to jump over a bunch of stuff because we're almost out of time. The heart of the Aparecida document, 6.2.1, were aspects of the process of the formation of missionary disciples. And this is so important because this is at the heart of the document. And they went on to say that this process of formation has to be applied to every aspect of the life of the church. Number one, the encounter with Jesus Christ. It's number one. It's got to start there. And an encounter that leads to conversion. And the bishops say that the conversion includes a decision to follow Jesus, a decision that is actualized in the sacrament of baptism or the sacrament of reconciliation. And once the conversion has happened, then discipleship takes place. And the bishops say it is at this point that sacraments and catechesis should happen. Stage 3, sacraments and catechesis. And then communion is community, the community of the church. People who have become missionary disciples, they want to live in experienced Christian community. They need to be with people who are like-minded. And finally, mission. And the bishops are clear that mission is not a stage subsequent to conversion. But if someone truly becomes a disciple, they will truly become a missionary disciple at the same time. They might not be very good at it. In my parish, the best missionaries are the people who have just had a conversion. We have a man who had a big conversion on Alpha. I'll say more about Alpha later. He hadn't gone to church in 35 years. And within days of his conversion, he's telling everyone about Jesus. He's a missionary. Sometimes there are people in the church that say this, and I think this is wrong. We have to help people become disciples, and then help them to become mature disciples. And if you're mature enough, then you can be a missionary disciple. No. Our best missionary disciples are all the immature people. The people who have just experienced Jesus in a new way. The people who have come to life in their faith. They're the most excited. So people will become missionary disciples when they become disciples. I want to jump ahead to the final slide, and then we'll have some question and answers. So finally, Pope Francis. So I want a church that goes out, right? That's a church that goes out is going to be a church that is filled with missionary disciples. And of course, finally, Evangelii Gaudium. I dream of a missionary option that is a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. This is Pope Francis's dream. This is his vision for the future. A church in which everything is transformed for the sake of mission. And he believes it. This is why he does what he does. It's why he says what he says, because he's talking to the people out there on the outside and not primarily those on the inside. And of course, this document tells us that the parish is suitably positioned to carry on this great mission that has been entrusted to the church. It is not an outdated institution. He talks about the parish as having great flexibility. The question for us as a church is, are we willing to flex it? Are we willing to do what needs to be done so that we can step into the mission that Jesus himself has given us, to be a church that evangelizes and raises up missionary disciples? For those of you who may be aware, we've got a website, divinerenovation.net. There are many resources on the website. And one of the things, it's not available in Spanish yet, but this past year we published Divine Renovation Guidebook. This actually is the Latin American book. It's the same cover as the English, and it's only $15 US, by the way, but only in Latin America. So it's a lot cheap. I have nothing to do with the prices of the book, nothing to do with it, okay? So don't blame me. But this is the Latin American Spanish book. But this is the Divine Renovation Guidebook. This is meant for pastors, for pastoral councils, for leadership teams. And whereas the first book was a kind of manifesto, a proposal, a theological and pastoral proposal, this book is meant to help you to do it. And what's in this book should take you about 6 years to do. Okay? It's about 6 years worth of work, because remember, the process of leading renewal in the parish is hard work and it takes time. Okay, so now we're going to have some questions.